and away we go. Back to here to the news desk. 2026 now shaping up to be a pivotal year for the U.S. and, of course, the world, with economic shifts, political battles, and, of course, global uncertainties, which we saw over the weekend. Today we speak with Dwayne Deason, owner and president of the Efficacy Group, to explore what's next. Mr. Deason, welcome back to the news desk. Thank you for your time today. Sure appreciate it. I'm not quite sure if I've got your audio up there. Maybe are you on mute, sir?
Oh, I am. I'm coming through. It looks like I'm doing okay on this end.
Yep, there you got you now. Okay,
Right,
so Mr. Deason, we are not yet, well, I guess we are about a week in, just about 6 days into the new year, and we have a regime change in Venezuela. Your initial thoughts, first of all.
Well, it's an exciting start to the year. I think very positive operation as far as when no casualties on the American side. And I think we got rid of what is probably certainly a dictator and obviously someone involved in the drug cartel and business. So I think very positive, but 6 days does not make a year, right? So we have a long way to go. And that's true, particularly in Venezuela, where just because you remove a bad guy doesn't mean good things always happen. There's a lot of bad guys in the line. So we'll see how things work out there.
Okay. We're a few weeks away from a possible government shutdown once again. How could this impact the economy and the markets?
It's really a shame because we have a lot of positive things coming up with the big beautiful bill. We have tax cuts that are hitting that started January 1st. So we have a lot of good stimulus. The market's off to a good start. And what really could break that stride is this shutdown at the end of the month. And it really comes down to, I think, this subsidized healthcare, whether we're going to want to continue those COVID subsidies. And Democrats really dug their heels in on the last time. We had one of the longest, we had the longest shutdown in history. And the question is, are we going to have that again? And I think I put it at better than 50-50 chance that the Democrats draw the line unless we can come up with some sort of deal for those COVID subsidies of the healthcare program.
Okay, let's talk now midterms. How might an early surge in political rhetoric and campaign spending influence the business confidence in 2026?
You can always count on that rhetoric starting as early as possible, right? That politics never disappoints in that way, and it's going to be ugly and it's going to be mean. But I think the American people are used to that, and I think a little numb to it, and so I don't think it's going to change the economics. It always divides us a little bit and polarizes our country, which you never like to see. But I don't think it's going to impact our economy, our GDP, our spending. The only thing that could really do that would be that shutdown, and that could be part of the reason for people trying to score political points before an election. So as long as that doesn't happen, I just don't think that rhetoric is going to make a huge impact. It's going to be unpleasant, but we'll be okay.
We're hearing this word bandied around quite a bit, Dwayne. Affordability. What role will that word play in shaping voter priorities in economic policy this year?
We just need to go back and make sure that affordability is an issue that started, I believe, 3 or 4 years ago during COVID when we had 10% inflation and we just never caught up. Wages have not caught up to the inflation that we incurred. Last year's inflation was actually quite reasonable. It wasn't quite the target we go for, which I believe is 2%. I think it was closer to 3%, but it really wasn't unreasonable compared to historical standards. And now we're in a situation where I think the administration is even concentrating more on affordability. And I think this year should be pretty good in that regard. Tariffs are not going to be as big of a player probably in 2026 as it were in 2025, and those always impact tariffs. In fact, those tariffs might come down as we negotiate deals with our neighbors in Canada and Mexico. And if that happens, I think that could lower prices a little bit. The China thing could heat up and change that a little bit, but overall, I think that there's more upside. That inflation is going to continue to come down. I think wages will do okay. The affordability issue will get better, but it won't. But it won't be great. It's going to take years for people to really recover from that. And of course, it will be still an issue because voters feel the pain.
We're looking at a new Fed chairman. If interest rate cuts are made under the new Fed chair, what kind of ripple effects should we expect in the housing market and investment markets?
You hope that that's going to lower interest rates on mortgages. I think that would really help people buy houses and afford houses. But there's always a ripple effect in that effort where now that prices of houses go up because there's not a big enough inventory and
Hmm.
too many people are chasing too few houses. And so there's a lot of aspects of the interest rate. Just because they start to tick down doesn't always mean that helps everybody. You could see with bond rates come down, that means lending in general becomes more viable to businesses, and that's a stimulant. So lower interest rates are generally considered good stimulants, and if you don't have an inflationary environment, there's not a lot of risk necessarily to create. But it's also not going to make a huge difference with a half point like we're talking. We're not. I don't think we're looking at 2 or 3% lower interest rates by the end of the year. That I don't. No one's anticipating that. So it'll have a small ripple effect, but not a large one.
Okay. How could renewed tariff negotiations with China and other trade partners affect some of our U.S. companies and consumers?
China is the big wild card. I think there's a lot of upside in all the other negotiations, and I do think that Canada and Mexico will come to some better terms there, and might those tariff rates might come down a little bit, and that will help. But I think China is a wild card, and that negotiation last year was very rough, and they have some leverage with the rare earth materials that they cut off entirely, and so the United States, we're not in a position to really put as much pressure on them as we did in President Trump's first term. Now, over time, I think we'll get out from under that hold on the rare earths, and I think we'll have more leverage again. But in the meantime,
Hmm.
it could heat up again, and you never know if they do something like attack Taiwan or make a big move there, or there's many other political issues we could have. Even Venezuela, Venezuela owes China quite a bit of debt, and so all those things could ripple and cause a reignite, I guess, the tariff war and could cause trouble again. So it's a little bit of a wild card that I hope doesn't come into play here.
Let's talk other global flashpoints. As you mentioned, Taiwan is one. You've got the war in Ukraine that has been, 4 years now, I believe. And of course, the Middle East. What do you feel could pose the greatest economic risk for 2026?
Well, it's interesting in the sense that I think this Venezuela action could have a ripple effect where now President Trump is talking about potentially Cuba, and so it could play out to other areas, including some in our own region. As far as which will have the most economic impact, it is probably going to be anything that happens in the Middle East because they're such a powerhouse for creating oil and pumping oil. And so if something happens with oil and those prices shoot up, it always has a poor impact on the economy. So it's almost always the risk. My heart breaks for the Ukrainian citizens, but it's the that isn't actually going to create a lot of economic impact unless we do something like we put sanctions and finally really enforce them on Russia, and that
Hmm.
could potentially slow down oil and natural gas outflow, and therefore raise prices again, and it could have a ripple effect. But I think the biggest risk is the Middle East as far as economic impact.
Do you believe the AI boom will continue, or are we at risk of a bubble bursting?
Wow, that's a great question, and I think the real risk on that is ChatGPT, because as long as ChatGPT stays number one or one of the top AI companies, then I think the boom will continue because they're a big spender. But I think if you start to see some of the other AI competitors starting to challenge their top tier, and that what happens is ChatGPT can't raise the money that they need. They're talking about spending $1 trillion, and if they can't raise much capital, then they're going to have to cut back their spending, and I think that will have a tough ripple effect into the whole AI infrastructure. So I do think there's some risk if ChatGPT can't stay on top, and a lot of those competitors have a lot of good backing. We're talking
Hmm.
Google, Facebook. They are viable companies with heavy income and revenue streams, and they're competing with ChatGPT, which isn't projected to be profitable for years. So there is some risk there of that bubble bursting, and I think that they counted for a significant part of our GDP last year. If that bubble bursts, that could really impact our economic performance this year.
I just read today that NVIDIA introduced their processing chip earlier than they expected. And NVIDIA, I mean, they're just on a record climb, aren't they, with their price?
They're just hitting it on all cylinders, and they became the most valuable company in the world last year, and they never look back. And they've really you can't say anything bad about them. And there's even a more upside with China just being allowed to purchase not their top level chips, but some pretty good chips. And that with that restriction lifted, I think their sales can only increase. So unless that bubble bursts, they are looking unstoppable.
Are we worried about Taiwan, the relationship that we have with them in China with the chips?
Yeah, that's another wild card that could happen in 2026. Most people think it's going to happen later, where China actually starts to put military action into Taiwan in order to bring it back into its fold, if you will. And if that happens, that would be very disruptive to the chip market, and to many aspects of the world, because you would expect the West would try to put sanctions on China in order to do that. China would cut the rest of the world off of rare earths in order to retaliate. It could get very messy very quickly if China makes that move. And so I'm hoping that won't happen, and I'm hoping it's years away, if ever. But if it happens in 2026, that's going to be probably the most significant factor that impacts the year.
Okay. Record stock market, can it sustain its momentum, or should investors brace for maybe a bit of a correction?
I think it can sustain its momentum, but I don't think it's necessarily going to be as good as the last couple of years. I think you might be looking at modest gains this year. There's a lot of good stimulants that are coming out, that if things play out as they should, which never really happens, but you hope they're going to happen as you expected. The stock market should hold up. It's hard to envision a huge upside because our valuations are so high. When we're at multiples of 23, 24%, you've only seen that a few times in history, and they were never great outcomes after that. There's always
Hmm.
been a correction. And so I don't think it's going to be a smooth ride. I think we're going to have corrections, and we're going to have ups and downs as that you normally see with the stock market. But I do think by the end of the year, there's a good potential that we'll be higher, if not necessarily significantly higher, but higher than we are today.
Energy prices, that's been a pretty hot topic. Do you look for them to spike due to some geopolitical tensions?
There's certainly room for it, and I would say there's times of momentary spikes. So I would say if there's a conflict breaks out in the Middle East, I think we'd see a little bit of a spike. I think with the Venezuela oil maybe coming off of market, because we're still not letting ships through there, so that oil's not going
Hmm.
onto the market. So there are certainly little blips that could happen that will spike the oil prices, but for the most part, there's plenty of oil. And if for whatever reason there's a little bit of an economic downturn, that could see oil plummeting quite a bit from even here. So that's one of the factors, that oil prices are not very high right now. And when oil prices aren't high, no one invests and wants to drill more, because they're just not going to make that much more money on it. And so I think right now it's actually considered a pretty low oil price, and I think it's a potential for even to go a little bit lower if the economy slows down, and it'll go a little bit higher in the event that there is some of these geopolitical conflicts that spike during the year.
Going back to, let's talk home energy prices. We talk data centers. We've got two here in the state. Local folks are paying, maybe not quite twice as much, but at least two-thirds of what they were paying last year.
Right. That is a potential long-term issue, because the United States has not really invested in its energy structure at the same time when AI is emerging and demanding a tremendous amount of energy and power. And so I do not think that is going to, unfortunately, go away or even lessen over the year, unless there can be regulations, or there can be laws passed that essentially say that a data center company has to pay a little bit more of a premium for their electricity as opposed to residential. So they can differentiate on price and try to make sure we protect citizens from rising costs of electricity just because they have a data center within that are surrounding their area. So I'm hopeful that that legislation comes out a little bit there that protects citizens from rising prices and make sure that that most of the energy costs goes to the AI companies that are really causing the problems in the first place.
Okay, we'll get you out of here with this. If you could give one strategic recommendation to businesses, individuals to thrive in 2026, what would it be, Mr. Deason?
I would say stay the course. I would say don't get too scared in the sense that you're going to see might see a government shutdown and a correction in the market. You might see some blips, whether it's the Middle East or some other conflicts. I would say make your plans, stay with your plan, and hold your ground, and don't panic. In this, it's going to be a wild. Last 2025 was, I would call it a wild year. I think 2026 is going to be a wild year, but 2025 it rewarded people that stood their ground, and I think 2026 will probably do the same.
Gold, what are your thoughts on that? Buy or sell?
Boy, it's one of those that's at such a high right now that it's hard to imagine it keep going. But every time I say that, it goes higher. I'm not buying just because it's such at a high right now. I think there's other opportunities, and gold doesn't give you much of a return as far as a dividend or any sort of income. It's just a matter of whether it goes up or down. So I'm not a bear on it, but it's not where I'm putting my money right now.
Dwayne Deason, owner and president of the Efficacy Group. Thank you, sir. Appreciate the last 20 minutes.
Thank you so much, Shay.
All right, 18 minutes past the hour. Let's take a break. We'll come right back with a look at your local news headlines next on KFYR Plus.